Well, I'm definitely delighted to be back here at the University of Redlands. Always happy to accept an invitation here. Great campus, great people, and it's just really inspiring. And to see all the students working on just tremendous projects. My background being on the geography side, did a master's in geography, PhD in geography, but I've always really gravitated to business too. And so I just love the setup of this university where you have that intermingling of geography and business. And with Esri so close by and being able to leverage that relationship, I just think it gets these students set up for such success early in their careers. And so I think you guys are doing great work here, so definitely kudos to you. So what I'm going to do is talk for about 45 minutes-ish. I'm going to try to wrap by about 7, and then there'll be plenty of time for discussion and questions. But I will encourage you to please raise your hand at any point if there's something you're curious about. We can definitely make this interactive. So what I'm going to do is start by going into my background a little bit and talk about my career journey, because I've worked for a number of different organizations and really have been able to apply spatial thinking to solving business problems. And I've seen it on different scales. In this era, with the amount of amazing data that we have available to us, I want to talk about how I've seen the application of really big data thinking to help make a difference in business decisions. So I'll make it real with a number of examples and how you can take a method for two vastly different organizations but still get a positive result, kind of using that spatial thinking. And then we'll have some fun. I'm going to do a live demonstration of a market planning tool that we have at KFC. And then, as I said, we'll have a good discussion afterwards. So I've blurred the lines a little bit between being an academic and a practitioner. I moved to the Phoenix area to go to ASU to work on a PhD in 2005. And right when I got there, I had a professor who's an expert in facility location, Michael Kuby, who said, well, okay, we're going to have to build your dissertation committee. And part of the dissertation committee was having an outside member. And he said, I have a colleague that got his PhD here. He was a professor for a little while at University of South Carolina, but wanted to make his mark in private industry. So now he is running the research department at PetSmart, which is also based in Phoenix. And he said, why don't I ask him if he'll be on the committee, and for good measure, why don't you go do an internship with him too? I think he would agree to that, and that you would get a lot of value from it. So I did, and what I found out is I really liked it, because you're able to see the use of information to make decisions right away. So there was no delay in seeing the fruits of your efforts. And you could work on some really cool things. And what I like about retail geography is there's a psychological component to it, because you're trying to predict human behavior. And it's really fun because you're not just looking at dots on a map, but you're trying to think what is going to be the likelihood of dot A interacting with dot B. And a lot of that can come down to just human psychology, really. And so it's a lot of fun. I did this internship, and then that turned into a full-time gig because an opportunity came up. And this was before the Great Recession of 2008. So retail was exploding in the years rolling up to that. Now, while working for PetSmart, I continued to work on my dissertation and PhD, and I was looking at retail chains and kind of the history of retail in the US and the expansion and saturation of different retailers and what their practices were and how that then manifested itself into a spatial manner. So where are the chains, where have they been, where are they going, and then try to predict what's their next move. Because a lot of the retailers are publicly traded companies that need to find ways to continue to grow. So I was able to marry the practitioner experience with a good theoretical foundation where you're trying to create, obviously, new methods for solving problems relating to retail business geography. So I'll give you some interesting examples of some work we did at PetSmart. And then following PetSmart, I moved to a company that's based in Watsonville, California, West Marine. And when I was here for the GIS Day in 2015, I gave a presentation that was focused heavily on West Marines. And at the time, we were transitioning from a boating supply retailer to a water life outfitter. And I'll give you an update on what happened with that, but also some good examples of some of the work we did applying big data and spatial data. And then most recently and currently, I'm with KFC, and some fun things to talk to you about with this organization because KFC is going through a big brand turnaround right now, and I'm happy to play a small role in that. So when I was at PetSmart, we were building a lot of new stores in these brand new, huge retail centers that were being anchored by Target in particular. And they were proliferating across the country. And for PetSmart, they were building about 100 new stores a year in the first decade of the 21st century. And everything was working. They pretty much just needed to sign a lease, open the doors, and the store was going to be profitable. And so the CEO at the time really wanted to say yes to every single deal that was brought to him because it was working, and being publicly traded, there was a need to hit the 100 store count that we promised Wall Street. And if it's not broke, let's just keep doing it. Now that mentality works for a while until eventually something breaks because it's not sustainable to just constantly rinse and repeat all the time, because eventually you're going to exhaust your best opportunities. And so what I noticed was some of the deals that were being approved as we moved into, let's say, 2007, even before the brunt of the recession, was that these new stores weren't performing as well as the ones that were built in 04 and 05. And it was because we were making a habit of following Target. You can go around Southern California and you're going to see a lot of Target centers that have PetSmarts in them too, along with a number of other retailers that were following at the time. And Target was running out of their opportunities, so they were choosing locations that just didn't have the same trade area quality as the ones that predated them. And so that then affected PetSmart because we weren't getting as good a trade areas as well. They were either markets that weren't as large, so smaller towns, or moving to the periphery of markets to where the rooftops weren't there yet, so maybe the residential hadn't caught up with the commercial development. And I found this really interesting from the academic side of studying Target because there's been a lot of research on Walmart too, and how Walmart expanded from a base in Arkansas, and slowly it took decades to really spread across the country. And did Target grow the same way as well? And if so, what can we learn about what they might do next, because they're running out of organic growth opportunities domestically? And so this paper I wrote that was part of the dissertation was kind of a new way of applying concepts in really coastal geomorphology to the expansion of retail chains here domestically. And what this is showing is that a retail chain will continue to expand and build stores in an area, And then they're going to not build stores in that area for a period of time, only to, at a later point, come back and revisit the area for, let's say, a second store or a third store. And the idea here being they're going to try to find their best markets, right? So they're going to build stores there, and then, okay, we have stores there, so let's go look somewhere else to build stores. And then once they've exhausted those opportunities, they'll say, okay, where are our best performing stores? Let's put more of them in those markets. And maybe the store's doing well enough that we can sacrifice whatever that cannibalization may be. Now, Target and Walmart, they grew differently, but this concept holds for both in that once they exhausted their opportunities, they had to revisit markets. And that's not sustainable either. So that's where you see new concepts unleashed, like Walmart Neighborhood Market, for instance. And that really wasn't successful for them. But if you run out of areas for large supercenters, you got to try something different. You can't just stagnate. Walmart had checkered success with international expansion. And for Target, what they did, and you could really see it coming back then, is they're looking for avenues of growth. And so they start deploying in a lot of different urban environments too, and with smaller stores. Because a company is going to want to continue to do what works, what's comfortable, until they no longer have opportunities to do that. But it's important to have some foresight to see the writing on the wall of we're going to run out of opportunities in 2 years. We better have a good game plan, as opposed to being responsive after the fact of, we open a bunch of stores, they're not working, now what? And scramble to figure out a strategy. So I'm going to tie this back into what we did at PetSmart to continue growing, but just a moment on Target. See, they made the decision to go into Canada, and they spent billions of dollars making an acquisition, going in the market. And think about the Canadian consumer is the majority of Canadians visit the United States on an annual basis, and they're used to shopping in the United States. So they're very familiar with Target, and the Target experience that the Canadian consumer had was not the Target experience that the American consumer is used to. And there was a disappointment. There were supply chain issues. There were issues with holes on the shelves. Some of the locations weren't the best because they're also in a highly competitive market where there's Canadian Tire is a major retailer, and Walmart had inroads in Canada long before Target. So now they're third in, and Target overpaid for the deal, and they weren't successful right out of the gate. So they pulled the plug on it early. Well, it cost the executive team their jobs, and Target had to sell off their pharmacy. So now you see CVS's inside of Target, and it's taken them a long time to try to rebound from that, but it's very predictable. And you can think about it for other businesses. Think of other businesses that are growing, and who's going to exhaust their opportunities, and then what are they going to do? And do they have a business model that's set up to be flexible? And so it really is a runway. So when there's a kind of a mantra in real estate that it's all about location, location, location. I don't like this. I actually cringe a little bit when I hear people say location, location, location. Now for Target, what good is it if you're in a really good retail center, but there's no people that live near you because you're in the middle of a desert and you're just trying to find that next good real estate deal? Oh, we got great rent out here, and in time, all this desert area is going to fill in with households. But you know what? The problem is that growth never occurred. And so this is actually Bullhead City, Arizona. And I bring this one up because you might be able to see there's a little area on this pylon sign that is the PetSmart store. And that was one of the worst PetSmarts that opened that year. I think it was 2007 where it opened. Location can be great if you're main downtown. Like this is right in the action. But is it a good real estate deal, or are you overpaying? So here you might have a great deal with no people. Here you might have a horrible deal, but you're surrounded by people. So the thing is, what's going to work from a pro forma standpoint for your organization? And instead of thinking about location, 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 it really starts with thinking about customers. And that's really the foundation of, I think, good retail location decision making. So when I'm asked what makes a good retail location, my answer is one that is as simple as possible for your intended customer to come find you, to come visit. Because it's so competitive that you have to make it really simple for the consumer. So that means you need to know where your existing customers are, where your target customers are, and you need to know as much about them as you can, because now that ties into the psychology of how can your location be used as a means to try to attract potential customers into the door. And so it starts with mapping customers, but it definitely doesn't end there, because there's so much data that then you can apply to all those little sub-geographies where the customers are to truly understand things like distance decay. How far are consumers willing to travel to a store location? How does that vary based off who the consumers are? Will college students have the same needs as senior citizens? And how does that affect where they'll shop and what they'll buy? And so then it ties into this, and Esri does a great job with this with their Tapestry product, is lifestyle segmentation. And so taking it a step beyond just age, income, other demographic variables, but looking at it in terms of an overall lifestyle. And what can we predict about that lifestyle based off of distance from a store and the value proposition of the store? So customer research is really, if I go into a new organization, that's the first thing I want is customer data with a locational element to it, so that then we can really start to learn. So as an example of some lifestyle segmentation, here's a couple of them that are in the Tapestry program, just giving examples. So boom burbs, these are individuals that are still relatively young, head of household. A lot of times they're raising younger families. They have some affluence, and this gives some examples of some activities that they participate in. So things like gyms and fitness centers are going to do really well. Probably Jamba Juice is going to do really well near boom burbs. Up and coming families is a group similar to boom burbs, but the thing about them is they're a little bit younger and they don't quite make as much money. But think about that. If the median age of up and coming families is 31 and the median age of boom burbs is 34, well, what's going to happen is this group is going to get more successful with time because they're educated and motivated. And so up and coming families in a few years may turn into boom burbs. And they might say, okay, we're living in this neighborhood here, but things are going well, so now we can afford to move out to a bigger place. And so there's interconnectivity between the different lifestyle segments too, which is really interesting. So the customer piece, it matters because that's where it starts. And you want to have a deep understanding of current customers, identify target customers too, and it's just so important that retailers make that investment into a customer database. I mean, it's opportunities to not only retain your current customers, grow their share of wallet, but also find the next customer. And then, when you know your customers, you can truly tailor your assortments. Or in the case of KFC, you can tailor your marketing, right? And you can understand the existing network of the store locations a lot more when you really understand your customer, because you can see where the gaps are and where the opportunities. You know, most organizations are not, or most opportunities, I would say, for students going into the career market are not with brand new startups where you're not dealing with any existing past. Usually there's something you're already going to deal with, some history to an organization. With retail, there's already existing stores. So it's not perfect that you can start with a clean slate and say, here's where every single store is going to be. You need to learn to navigate around what is existing and how do we improve and optimize given the existing framework of an organization. And so doing analysis on every single location within a fleet is really important to make sure, are these locations in the right places? Are we serving the customer that our offering, that our value platform is designed for? Or are we in the wrong places? And you can think about lots of businesses and does it make sense where they're located? Like, think any chain you want, like even around here, and you might think, oh, that's a great location, or wow, that's a really surprising location. Why would that be there? So I work with a gentleman named Dean Awada. He was my boss at West Marine, and I really want to give him credit for his 4 Ps of retail. And I've worked with him on a number of projects since West Marine, but he's really good at covering anything dealing with a retail organization. I've learned a lot from him. And customers are such an important aspect of it. But it's important internally to be successful in business that you have the right people in place internally on your own teams, that you have the right product and assortment, not just in general for the business, but for that market, that the presentation is up to speed. At KFC right now, we're remodeling almost every single store, and we just moved to 50% of the fleet now being with the latest iteration of our store design. I'll show you an image of that later, the American Showman. But nobody wants to go visit a crummy, worn down store or something that just doesn't present itself well. But then place is right up there as a pillar in business. Are you where you need to be? Are you near your customers? So we did a consulting project with a company based out of Irvine, California here called 511 Tactical. And our job was to build them a real estate strategy. And we looked at where the current penetration of customers was for the stores. And so what you're seeing on this map here is store customers for Frisco, Texas, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And what's really interesting is that there's a lot more penetration of customers to the north than there is to the south of the store. And tying that into the lifestyle segmentation, these also happen to be a lot of boom burbs in this areas and up and coming families here in boom burbs. And so we were able to index and understand who the most frequent customers were and what their patterns were, because this company at the time only had about 40 brick and mortar retail stores and had their sights set on building potentially 200 of them. And so they needed a full-scale across the country growth plan retail strategy. And what was also interesting is that the customers, there's some close to the store, and it's first law of geography that proximity matters. However, there were also customer groups willing to travel 8, 10, 12, 15 miles. Now, if you think about, you might not be familiar with 511 Tactical. It's a big brand. Like I said, not that many retail stores. There is one in Riverside, which is going to be the closest one to here. But there are about 4,000 square foot stores that sell products that are bought by first responders, military. They're specialized apparel and equipment. And so it's not something you can just go into Walmart and get. So unless you're ordering it online or there's local competition, you're buffered a little bit for where you put the store because you know that customers will seek you out. If this were KFC, that wouldn't work because we got Popeyes, Raising Cane's, Chick-fil-A, all these other competitors just waiting to eat our lunch if we're not right on top of our customers, right? So it's understanding the nuances of the business can be really important, but it does leave some vulnerabilities for future competition to come in if you're not right on top of your customers. Revisiting PetSmart. So the first project I worked when I was an intern was on competition. And I was told, kind of day one, here's some data. We want you to tell us about competitive threats. Tell us something we don't know. And one of the misnomers is, okay, if a competitor opens up right across the street from you, that's going to be the most damaging scenario. And PetSmart's biggest competitor at the time, and still is Petco. Now, PetSmart felt good about how they would stack in head-to-head competitions because PetSmart had bigger stores by about 25% larger. They had newer stores, in some cases cleaner stores, and they had some better pricing on comparable products. So when you have a differentiated advantage like that, you don't want to avoid your competition. You want to go right after your competition. However, the biggest competitive threat that I learned is when a Petco would open up about 3 miles away from a PetSmart. That's when you have the ability to lose a good chunk of your trade area. So this example is in the Victorville market. And there used to be just this PetSmart store up here, all alone in the market. So when this Petco opened up, I think that's about 4 miles away, it took a significant amount of volume from that store because this is all residential population. So if you live in a neighborhood right here, and you might like PetSmart, but guess what? If your dog's out of food and you need something, you're going right down the street to Petco and saying, okay, I'll pay the extra 20 cents for the can of food or the big bag of food. I'll pay a couple extra bucks, I need it. Because this crushed this store so much, and that store is doing fine. It was one of the largest volume stores in the entire chain. We at PetSmart decided, okay, well, we can't just let Petco come in and take all this market. So this city is growing, and let's find another location. And that's where this store came into play afterwards. And obviously, I don't know what effects it had on Petco at the time, but I'm guessing that it squeezed them because now anyone over here, it's going to be a lot more convenient. And since PetSmart was first in the market, there's probably a lot of customers that defected that now maybe came back. Well then, recently, long after I left the company, Petco opened a store to the south here in this growing area. So it's interesting, this kind of chess game of what's going on in this market. And as it continues to grow, like what's the next move? Is it PetSmart? I mean, if I'm looking at this, just forget big data for a second. Let's just look at what we see in front of us. I see a lot of households right here and a lot of open territory. I'd want to put a store right there. If the market, if there's enough households and parents in the area to be able to sustain additional openings. But that really got me excited that I was able to tell, and this went to the CEO even, like something as basic of, no, a competitor hurts you more when they're a few miles away. Because now we can leverage that into kind of corporate real estate strategies. There was a VP of store ops at the time who had a mission for PetSmart, that every single store in the country be the exact same. We want to be able to take a store manager in Fargo and send that store manager down to Pflugerville, Texas, and be able to get them to know what to do right away to open the doors and run the store. They know where everything is, and it just works so much better to have standardization. Well, we found some problems with this on the research team. we kind of stumbled upon by accident. I was looking at some database and noticed that PetSmart threw away $85 million worth of dog food in 1 year, just destroyed it, because it's a perishable product. Once the expiration date hits, you got to take it off the shelves and you got to just destroy it. But 85 million. Meanwhile, we have stores that are in a variety of locations. Some are in suburban areas where people have big yards. Some are in urban areas where people have no yards. And so, well, there's got to be a geographic aspect to it. So when I dug into it a little bit more, what I found is that if you map out areas that lean more dog and areas that lean more cat, it actually kind of matches the political map of the United States in a number of ways. And that's not to say that Democrats like cats more and Republicans like dogs. No, it's a function of the geography itself. You go to Texas, you go to suburban Dallas-Fort Worth, and you have big yards, you can have big dogs. You can't have big dogs in small, cramped little apartments in Manhattan. So people a lot of times will get pets that are suited for their environment. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more than that, but even if you're a dog lover and you're in New York, it might be easier to have a small dog than a big dog. So why have these big 60-pound bags of dog food, especially if you're trying to put stores in dense urban areas where real estate is at a premium? You need to find what's going to work for that market. Otherwise, you're just going to run out of opportunities. So there was a store in South Philly. There was only one PetSmart store in the entire company that was selling more cat product than dog product. So the way PetSmart is set up is about 50% of the selling square footage is devoted to dog, about 25% for cat, and the rest for small animal, fish, etc., and services. However, even though it had only half the space, this store was selling more cat product than dog, and dog product can be more expensive too, so it was incredible. It's South Philadelphia. This is like Rocky Balboa's neighborhood, if that helps. And so it's in a very dense urban environment. This is all industry over here. And this is a specialized premium dog food that goes for about $55 to $60 a bag. And the bag is about like that size, and that's what you're paying for. That store never sold a lick of that thing. It would stay on the shelf until it expired. Store manager would, oh, we got to take this down. Well, their system was set up that, oh, you have a hole on the shelf. We're going to automatically refill it, and we're going to ship that same product out. An endless cycle of doing that. And so we went in, we worked, it was cross-functional effort, and we were able to fix that to be able to now customize some stores. Let's give them another aisle of kitty litter. Because what would happen is people would come into the store for the products they wanted, and there were holes on the shelves because consumers had already purchased all of the kitty litter and Fancy Feast and all of that. So then they'd have to go find an associate and say, hey, I want to get this product. Oh, let me run to the back, see if I can get it. Now all of a sudden you have nobody in the front that's staffing the cash register. And so now somebody's waiting and they're getting upset. And so the store's just not functioning well. And it's just kind of really obvious stuff that eventually you need to get all the data to make your arguments. But it's kind of simple conceptually of the power of spatial thinking in a business. One thing that was fun that actually, you're going to have some swings and misses in business. It happens. But what we were able to do is reduce the size of the store from 20,000 square feet to 12,000 square feet. When I talk about exhausting your opportunities, PetSmart had exhausted a lot of their opportunities for 20,000 square foot stores. So, well, maybe are there markets that aren't big enough for a 20,000 square foot store that now if we could find a way to retain as much of the sales as possible but do it in a smaller box, can we do that? And then how many markets would that be? So we worked and devised a method to get 86% of the sales retained, but reduced the box from 20,000 square feet to 12,000 square feet. So this opens up a number of markets. And one of the markets we looked at was Kingman, Arizona. Now this store, from what I understand, is doing a fine volume. The miss was, can anyone notice anything interesting about what's going on here at this pylon sign? Yeah, so they didn't have a non-compete. So our thought was, and it's super competitive, and Petco was coming in, like the Victorville example. And part of it too is we're hoping, well, maybe we could purchase and acquire Petco, and they've actually tried. It wouldn't surprise me at some point down the line if you do see that merger. But it was, well, here's a small town that our data show probably can only support one pet specialty store of this size. And Petco's got the market, and it's in Arizona, the home state of PetSmart. Let's take that market. Let's make that ours. We're going to give the consumers there a better experience, build them a better store, offer better services. However, Petco has dug their heels in, and they haven't left. So in this small little town, in this one center, there's both a Petco and a PetSmart, and I drive by this thing about once a month, and I go looking to see if that Petco is still open, and amazingly enough, it is. And the swing and miss is I gave the recommendation that there's no way Petco is going to be able to survive. Now, they obviously have a store lease, but that lease would have expired probably a long time ago because this strategy was from about 10 years ago, and they're still open. Either that or it's a market that has so much outside the trade area business because people are traveling 50 miles to get here because it's in kind of a remote area, that maybe the market's playing larger than its size. But the good news all around is at least this store is doing well, and if Petco's doing well too, then we can all share in the celebration. Yes?
I'm just wondering, could you explain that with Harold Cotellini's model of the ice cream vendors on the beach and the fact that the two could exist with all of the people coming to one location? Sort of like a McDonald's on one corner and
Yeah.
Burger King on the other.
And it's really the basis for retail agglomeration of your increasing the size of the trade area because now you're giving consumers a choice. So you're attracting more people to this area. But whereas in the hoteling example, see, my thought there was we have a differentiated advantage. So it's not the same experience for the customer. There's better prices at the PetSmart. So we would think there'd be a lot more defectors, but all things being equal, if you locate near your competition and everything else is the same, then potentially you should share in the same trade area, as opposed to if we were to go north in Kingman, then we're going to really segment ourselves to just a small fraction of the population that we're closer to. So it's absolutely the right strategy to go after your competitors if you feel you have a strategic advantage, or even if you're just on equal footing, because you don't want to give competition any advantage, especially as it gets to convenience, because it is all about the customers, and customers will, there's a lot of customers that don't even know the difference between PetSmart and Petco. A lot do, but when I was working for them all the time, people would say, hey, how are things going at Petco? My buddy who lived in the East, there's a supermarket chain there called Pathmark, and they always thought he worked for Pathmark because it was red and blue and everything. So there's some very loyal consumers, especially if you have a great experience. A little bit different in the food industry, but when you have products that are kind of the same and the same type of ease of getting the product, you go and you pull something off the shelf, then there might not be that level of customer loyalty, and that's why you got to do things to make customers more loyal. I want to pick up the pace a little bit here. I might go about another 10 minutes, and then we should leave plenty of time for discussions. At West Marine, and this is some of the stuff I talked about 4 years ago, but West Marine was really interesting because we were trying to increase our number of new customers because our base of customers was about a 55 to 60-year-old affluent male. However, they were spending a lot of money on their boat right now, but would they be spending that same money on their boat in 10 years, in 15 years? There were a lot of people exiting boating, just retiring. I'm selling my boat. There were people that were moving from big sailboats to smaller boats or sharing boats with their friends and family. And so the industry was kind of stagnating. There was still a lot of participation, but people weren't spending as much. So we could either sit around and watch this thing slowly erode over time, or we can identify a growth strategy and potentially bring in a new customer base. But one of the big things that we saw was that the products had different trade areas. So people were traveling further for those niche products, like good sailboat rope. Because if you have a really expensive sailboat and you're on the high seas, the last thing you want to have is cheap rope, right? You want to protect your boat, you want to protect yourself. However, if you're selling sunglasses, well, sunglasses are more ubiquitous. You can go into Dick's Sporting Goods and find some of the same sunglasses. So it only makes sense that your trade areas are going to be a little bit smaller when your products are more ubiquitous, because people can find them somewhere else. If you have something that's a specialty product, then they're going to seek you out. And so what we saw was that was the case with both products, but then also the lifestyles of the people that were shopping, because we had a lot of people like this that were buying sailboat rope, and they live in San Francisco, and they're willing to travel to get their product. But then we had a lot of younger families that just maybe needed a personal flotation device that would come in, but they live closer to the store. And you have a lot more of this group than you have this group, so there's a definite opportunity here. But how that turns into this curve is the green is this segment here. The decline just shows distance from the store. You got to be closer to them to get more share of wallet. Whereas this group, it's a little bit more muted in that they'll continue to drive longer distances to shop you. And they've probably been loyal customers for a long time too. Now with KFC, so we are in the middle of well, I'd say more than the middle. We're on the upward side of a big brand turnaround. Now, there were 5,000 KFC restaurants in this country just about 10 years ago, and now we're just over 4,000. However, our path is to get back to 5,000. Now, there's a lot that you have to do to bring a huge brand back around. I mean, you're talking about steering a ship. It doesn't turn that quickly. However, we have a really good plan, and we're seeing the fruits of our success. So you have to improve the look and feel of the store. Nobody wants to go to something old and tired. So earlier I had teased the new image. This is the American Showman image. So let's make as many of our restaurants look like that as possible. All the new restaurants we build, let's make them look really nice. We've also increased our marketing and put everything into a national ad fund so that franchisees pay a portion of their sales into this ad fund so that we can buy marketing dollars in prime spots. Let's make sure operations are where they need to be. So we went through this, it was called rekernelization process, getting back to doing things the hard way, the right way, and not accepting mediocrity. And then the other piece to it is finding new assets. Let's get rolling again. So we have an industry-leading system incentive for franchisees that will get a rebate on sales, on their royalties in the first 3 years of a new construction, to give them some incentive to want to build, to sign up franchisees to growth agreements, and to be really smart with franchisees acquiring others in the system. And then those franchisees that do acquire, let's get them motivated to grow. And that's really what my role is now, is to work with the franchisees to help them find their new locations. And I do that for the Western United States, anything that's in really the Mountain Time Zone or Pacific, and then Alaska and Hawaii. And let's motivate them to grow, but then let's make sure that they're successful when they do, because then they'll want to continue to grow some more. And the reason why the growth matters is not only to get back to 5,000, and that's a lofty goal, and our competitors continue to grow, especially Chick-fil-A and Popeyes, and Raising Cane's too. But every time there's another touch point for the brand, it's so much reinforcement. We talked earlier about psychology. Every store is an advertisement for the brand. It's important to be top of mind. And each store then pays not only additional royalty, but they pay their percentage into the ad fund. So if you increase your store count by 20%, now conceivably you should have somewhere, hopefully 20% if your sales volumes are the same of your existing fleet. We've seen that the sales volumes are higher for newer stores. So now you're talking about more than 20% additional ad fund. You buy more ads, you then drive more business. So it's a good cycle, and it's a good sign that this is a growth company. This isn't a legacy dying brand. This isn't Kmart. You know, this is a company that's on the upswing. So when I started with KFC in 2016, I led the market planning function. And we needed a market plan. And the market plan is to help guide franchisees where to grow. Because corporate is not building the new stores. It is on the backs of our franchisees. And so it's their investment, it's their dollars. And so we can't say, okay, grow. No, we have to motivate them. We have to influence them and work with them as partners to grow. So what do we do for customer data? I go back to we need data. Well, we don't have a loyalty program like PetSmart or West Marine did. So we were able to get the advantage of all that great customer data when people would swipe their cards to save 8 cents on a can of cat food. Well, what we did was we worked with a data provider, Analytics, who has a partner, Cubix, that's the industry leader in massive mobile data. And this is basically pinging cell phones and then tracking the location of those phones. So the first step was every single store needed a geofence around it. And then what we're able to do is track whenever a cell phone comes in, we're able to ping that phone if they have one of 100 leading apps on their phone and they've agreed to location services, which a lot of people, when they see terms and conditions, just will say, yes, I agree to those terms. And well, when you do that, you're kind of signing away the right to be able to protect that data. So that's one of the things that's in there. Now, for us, we don't care who the name is or any of that. We just want to know the location so that we can put stores where customers are. Now, California, I know, is going to be on the forefront of protecting data in the future, and there's a number of potential legislation on the table, but it's a product that's available right now. And so when a phone enters the geofence, we're then able to retroactively see where that person was coming from before entering the geofence, where they're going after they leave the geofence, where that device idles overnight, which now becomes the home location of that device, so you know where people live, and then where that device idles during the course of the day. And that becomes the daytime location. So now we're able to have residential trade areas that we can delineate. So if these are all our dots, we can delineate a trade area. And notice that it's not a concentric ring, but that it takes the shape of the geography here. And there's no other stores in this market. If there was another KFC store here, this trade area you see is probably going to be truncated. Kind of that Petco, PetSmart example of people will continue to come here for this product because they don't have an intercepting opportunity. And then we're able to apply the lifestyle segmentation based on the neighborhoods where these customers are and see our indexes of who is the best customer, who is the least frequent customer. And using all of this empirical data, we're then able to take thousands and thousands of data points along with millions of consumer records and devise this market plan where we know all the existing trade areas, we know the sales, we're able to forecast what can happen at new units, and then let's put that in a map for franchisees to be able to use so that, whoops, 1 second, so that they know, okay, here are the existing locations, and now we have a prioritized plan of this is a B market call. So a B market call is going to have higher priority than a C market call, than a D market call. And this is just an example here, but how this works is this B market can pull from a really good trade area. because there's residential that surround it in all directions, and it spaces out pretty well from the existing stores. This C, if you see the location, it might look the exact same as this B. And you may say, I don't really see a difference between these two locations. But the difference is proximity to this other store. So because that other store, that intercepting opportunity is there, now a potential trade area is going to be truncated. So this store may only pool to about right this area, and so it's going to have a smaller trade area. And so that's why you can't just look at the location and say, oh, McDonald's is doing $4 million and the traffic counts are so high and that's where we need to be. You have to consider what your existing fleet is around you. Now this is a lower priority market call out here. This is a D. And the reason why, this is what we call a 180 trade area, meaning the people are to the west here. This area of the city hasn't developed yet. So if we open up out here, then we need customers to basically drive outbound, whereas maybe they come into the city to work, so we're only really going to capture them if they're coming from their home. We're probably not going to capture them coming from work. And so then it's all this understanding of trade areas and where consumers are coming from that then you can kind of set a market strategy. So in this case, maybe we look at this and say, there's 3 market calls, but we should really just build 2 stores. And let's definitely build the B. And the D we're going to do just because it's a good deal, but we know that there's going to be a bunch of growth in the future out here. So then it's strategic growth. And that may or may not be the right play in this market, but definitely the B is low-hanging fruit. Question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you, like, the software will be able to tell you, like, if people are driving and they, like, look up, like, the closest, like, KFC or something, will that also ping on, like, the map to, like, let you know, like, the area that people are in, like, searching for the closest KFC or something?
Well, from a search perspective, it's not so much consumer facing as much as it is franchisee facing, and to help them understand their markets. So I'm actually going to pull this up in interest of time. I think this is actually a good transition to the demo that I wanted to do. So you can see what our product is and how I would work in a meeting with franchisees to help them understand their geography better, because they have access to this and they can see the market plan and where we've advised them to grow, but do they really understand it? Does it make sense to them? And a lot of times they're historians of their own markets and they know the history of it. So let's go to Redlands. Might just need to reboot this. Let's see. Okay. Now for proprietary purposes, I'm not going to show what our current market plan is, but I will show where our existing fleet is and where competitors are. So if we go to Redlands, initially what I can see in all public information, let me make that a little bigger. So these are all the KFC stores. And I have all sorts of store sales, history information, operations data on hand. So I can really look and understand everything that's going on with the store based off all my sources of information. Franchisees cannot see the sales of other franchisee stores. That's one of the things that it's their business. We can see it, but we're not going to show another franchisee somebody else's business. So there's one KFC in Redlands. Now, one thing that I can show is where closed locations were. And I told you we've closed over 1,000 in the last 10 years. Well, there used to be another one in Redlands. Let's see if this layer is going to add for me. Maybe that one was taken out, but for instance, there was one in Yucaipa that had closed. What franchisees can also see, and we purchase data from a company called Restaurant Trends that is the industry leader in tracking QSRs and their sales performance. Now they're proxies for real data, but they're actually pretty good directionally. So I have the locations of all sorts of major competitors. So there is a McDonald's right by the KFC, and that McDonald's I'm showing is doing about 2.6 million in sales. And Jack in the Box is doing 1.1, and Del Taco is doing really strong. Now, I've seen this Del Taco. That's not your run-of-the-mill Del Taco. It's kind of an interesting building, right? So you think that interesting building, it's close to a college here, and yeah, doing 2.4, so that's really strong for them. So what we have is, how do these chains perform relative to the DMA average? And in this case, you look at the LA DMA, they're doing 158% on a benchmark, so they're doing significantly better than a normal Del Taco.
Does that take into consideration the hours that the store operates? That particular McDonald's operates 24 hours a day.
Now that's,
And then Jack in the Box only operates in the midnight.
yeah, that's really interesting. And for KFC, KFCs don't operate all night. So when you look at what our sales volumes are relative to competitors, it's not that we're not driving the traffic, it's that we don't have a breakfast layer, we don't have a late night layer. And so store hours absolutely matter when considering competitors, especially the 24-hour aspect. Because if I go to rural America and I look and see all these 24-hour McDonald's, they're doing crazy high volume. A lot of them have truck parking, but they're open all night, so that's going to inflate the number a little bit. So that's where it really matters to be an expert in the area where you're considering a location. So the closed KFC, there was one I know over by this McDonald's over here. In fact, I think we could probably even zoom in and see it. There it is. So, I mean, that was clearly the old KFC design. Now it's Nick's Burger. Who's been to Nick's Burgers? Is it good?
Yeah.
So we shouldn't buy them out and put KFC back in there? Okay. Now we have another Del Taco, and this McDonald's that I visited the last time I was here to check it out, and what I understand has been recently remodeled. And it makes sense because this was one of the scarier McDonald's I'd been into, just from an experience standpoint. So it was a much needed remodel job. But that McDonald's is showing that it's doing 3.4 million. So this McDonald's is doing better than the other McDonald's that's in town. So definitely they wanted to reinvest in this asset. And this Del Taco is only doing 75% of the DMA average. So isn't that interesting? In the city near the university, you have Del Taco that's doing phenomenal volume, McDonald's kind of mediocre, but then you come just a mile away, it's another side-by-side comparison, and here McDonald's is doing really well, and Del Taco's struggling a little bit. Now, I don't know if this Del Taco is 24 hours.
You have some very large hotels right there too, and you buy hopping dips, so there's a big draw.
And that probably ties into breakfast. So that McDonald's is probably doing a lot better in the breakfast layer and probably getting a lot more commuters, whereas in the town here, you may be getting more students. Mm-hmm. And so you can kind of think about that in terms of business, and it all makes sense, right? But it's so great. Yes?
Not to interrupt, but how do you get that historical data that I just gave you and you just talked about? In other words, knowing what's going on there, to inject into your planning. I mean, you can't know everything that's going on in the country when you put these plans together. What's accounting for that? You can track traffic flow and all these other things, but how do you get the sense of what's actually going on the ground in that location?
Yes, I mean, that's where it really becomes an art and a science. And I spend a lot of time in the field, and I try to learn as much about these markets and the history as I can. And you get a little dangerous just bopping around this program and Google Earth and looking things up, but you really have to know the lay of the land in the history. If you're going to have a conversation with a franchisee and tell him or her, you're going to spend $2.5 million, here's why, you got to have good facts. And so you can't half-heartedly come into it and say, well, McDonald's is not doing so well or they're doing well. You really need to understand the market. But the data piece is so great because you can, it's really step one with the data is understanding the lay of the land. So if we had a market call here, and I'll just tease it, we do have a market call, would we look at this and say, okay, should we be looking here? We have a closed KFC, we have a market call, we're looking at competitors. What kind of impact would it have on this existing store? Could that store withstand the impact? Does the franchisee want to impact themselves? But these are some of the questions. But if you're sitting on really low-hanging fruit, then it's a worthy conversation. I'll talk to a franchisee and say, have you considered Redlands? And they may say, well, we don't want to look at 10, 15% impact on our store right now. We got 25 other markets we can look at where there's not impact. So this now becomes the example of maybe we revisit it in time, but it's not ripe for right now until we go after some of the other lower hanging fruit areas. I'm gonna, so where we're at right now is 7:20. I'm gonna just pause, see what other questions. I can keep this up and show some more things, but I do wanna give you opportunity if there are other questions that you wanna ask. Yes?
How does, I know Yum Corporation consists of Taco Bell and Pizza Hut as well. How does that play a factor into picking the location per se of KFC when a competitor, I mean, you're showing other competitors that are fast food, right? But how does Taco Bell or Pizza Hut play into that?
Yeah, great question. We have franchisees that are also Taco Bell franchisees. Some come into our system. Maybe they built a lot of Taco Bells, and we have some legacy multi-brand, like KFC Taco Bell combo restaurants that we're trying to separate those from a brand identity standpoint. One of the first, I think, misnomers is that the trade areas are going to be the same. Now, KFC trade areas tend to be a little bit larger than Taco Bell trade areas, meaning people are willing to drive a little bit more. Because if you go and get a big bucket of chicken, a family meal, it's something you can seek out, and maybe you don't mind waiting a couple extra minutes for that hot and fresh chicken, right? Whereas Taco Bell, it's all about speed and convenience. And given that they have the late night and the breakfast layer, now they're able to do more volume. So since they can do more volume within the four walls, they're able to deploy more stores in an area because they're paying the same real estate costs that we are. And so it's very difficult for our franchisees relative to some other brands to compete for real estate. Because you have, let's say, Chick-fil-A come in and they're willing to pay $3 million, and Starbucks is the worst right now on what they're paying. So even within our brand itself, there's kind of expectation of, well, there's, let me show you an example of a market where we just opened up our highest performing KFC new opening in this recent iteration of KFC and American Showman. It's Redding, California. Now, it's a pretty good sized town, and I have the closed KFC layer up right now. And so there used to be multiple KFCs in Redding. The new store opened up on the north side of town, and so we have one KFC in the Redding market. When I compare that to Taco Bell, these are Taco Bell locations, there's 4 of them. So there can be an expectation from leadership to say, well, there's 4 Taco Bells, there should be 4 KFCs in Redding. But then it's kind of walking people through, here's what's appropriate for this market. Now, obviously, there's opportunity to build another KFC and maybe 2 other KFCs in this area, but it doesn't mean that's what Taco Bell has, that's what we should have. And it's really knowing your business and not necessarily following what a competitor or even a sister brand is doing. Other questions? Yes?
We hear all the time in the news that a recession is supposed to happen next 12 months. How is that affecting your guys' business plan and your whole reorganization?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to our CFO, and I asked basically the same question. I said, I was talking with a franchisee, and they're kind of on the fence about building a new store because they're thinking a recession's going to hit. And what he said to me first was, yeah, that sounds like something a franchisee would say. Now, there's obviously a lot of stories. I even had it up just a second ago. It was like the lead story. They may have taken it down, but it was one of the lead stories on USA Today just about an hour ago. I don't see it right now, but talking about how a number of major corporations are bracing themselves. There's a lot of volatility when you have a bull market that runs for 10 years. It's only natural to expect that there could be a downturn. What are we doing? I mean, recessions can be good and bad for the QSR industry. The Great Recession of 2008 was horrible because a lot of people didn't have the same level of discretionary income. If it's a mild recession, that could actually be a good thing because then people, I mean, it's not good, but for the industry, you might see a sales lift because the people might then seek out more value. And so you can get a $5 fill-up at KFC and have a real meal versus I just spent, what were we talking about? Wahoo fish tacos being potentially $42 for a party of two. So you could spend $42 on fish tacos at Wahoo's, or you can come get a couple $5 fill-ups. So potential there could be a spike, but if it's a bad recession, that's just not going to be good for anyone. It also opens things up from a real estate perspective. And what we saw at PetSmart when the recession occurred was PetSmart had a really strong value sheet. And so there were other businesses that were struggling. It opened up opportunity for, like, for example, there was a company called Linens and Things that maybe people remember, Circuit City, all these boxes that were closing. Now you have landlords that are desperate to get new tenants in, so they're willing to offer some pretty good real estate lease rates and throw in some tenant improvement dollars. So it's just, if you are strong enough as a company, you can plan and mitigate around those types of things. It's the weaker companies that really get slashed when recessions occur. Okay, we got 3 questions. We're going to start in the front, and then I'll work to you, and then I'll work to you. Yes?
So, excluding the PetSmart and Petco, like, e-commerce is such a big thing now. You have Chewy, for example.
Yes.
Being a great leader in that market. What do you think about the retail? What does your data show with these retail brick-and-mortar stores if they're growth in the next 5 to 10 years? Will they have possible growth in the future where now customers want to just order online?
Yeah, so PetSmart bought Chewy, and they overspent for them. And so PetSmart had a beautiful balance sheet, different leadership at the top, bought Chewy, spent a lot for them, and has been struggling. I still have friends with that company, and they're not building new stores anymore. And they're trying to respond to a changing environment. I'm a Chewy.com customer myself because it's so convenient just to have cat litter brought to your door, because who wants to haul around a heavy thing of cat litter and then put it in your car? And so it is brutal in the retail market. That's why restaurants are buffered from that right now. I mean, we're dealing with what is the future going to look like with delivery. And so we bought Grubhub. Well, we didn't buy Grubhub. We made a significant investment in Grubhub. So we're part owner of Grubhub. And it's going to be really interesting to see, but brick and mortar retail is really tough unless there's something you can do to differentiate, but it really is all about experience and making sure when a consumer does come in the door that they're getting a fantastic experience. I see we just have 2 minutes, so I saw 2 hands up, so we're going to finish up these questions and then I'll turn it back over. So, question? Measure the effectiveness of the use. I mean, what you're really looking for, you do a lot of back testing, that's for sure. So we saw some new openings that were lower priority market calls do really, really well, and try to figure, okay, why is it doing well and what have we learned and why isn't the market plan representing that? So for example, there's a store that opened up in Pecos, Texas. It's spelled Pecos, but I guess you pronounce it Pecos, Texas. And this store is doing a phenomenal volume. It's in this small little market where there was a former KFC that was really struggling. And so what is going on with this one? Well, you have the Permian Shale, and so it's an oil and gas boom that's going on right now. So you have a lot of workers that are coming in the areas, and so you have a lot of trucks, and you have a lot of people hauling things, and you have just a lot of hungry workers. And so that was kind of a learning of, oh, okay, there's something going on that the data is not picking up from a household perspective or from a built retail environment. And now it's a risk. I mean, you might not want to base a strategy off something that's boom or bust, but you're able to at least go back and see where did we miss and assign reasons why. So I think every single opening we've pretty much got a book on it's doing what we thought it would do, or the market plan is maybe missing something. So let's talk to our provider about what we can do to encapsulate that in the next version of the market plan. One more question? Oh, okay. Well, thank you all very much. This was a great experience for me, and I'll hang around for a little while longer if there's any other questions, but I've taken up a lot of your time, so I thank you all, and everyone have a great night. Thanks.
Please join me again in extending a warm Florence, we have a small token of appreciation for you, and let me see if I can. Nadine, am I doing this right? Hopefully, Julie. Why don't you do the honors?
Oh, okay.
This is for you.
The way you're doing it's not going to blow up on me.
I hope not.
All right.
It's a plaque, and just to say thank you to you.
Well, thank you very much.
Takes a while for this.
Oh, I frustrate my wife so much when I open a gift. She's like, just do it already. What do you? There we go.
And that's it.
Oh, that's nice.
Thank you very much. Well, I thank you.
Yes. Thank you all.
Well, it's truly been, again, a delight and a pleasure